The diner sat on the edge of Highway 89. The kind of place truckers stopped at out of habit, and locals treated like a second home. Linda Parker had owned it for 12 years. Ever since her husband walked out and left her with a 10-year mortgage, a 4-year-old daughter, and a stack of unpaid bills, tall enough to break a weaker woman. But Linda was not a weaker woman. She moved through the small lunch rush like she always did, refilling coffee cups, wiping down counters, smiling at jokes she'd heard 100 times. Sunlight came through the dusty windows in soft, gold ribbons, catching the steam rising from warm plates and the quiet clinking of silverware. It was the kind of peaceful afternoon that made her feel, for just a moment, like everything would be okay. Then she heard them, not engines, a growl, low and rolling, vibrating in the bones of the old building. The locals stopped mid-conversation. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. Another rumble followed. Then another. A whole line of motorcycles roared into the gravel lot outside, kicking up dust that drifted past the windows like a warning. Every head inside, the diner turned toward the parking lot. Linda felt her stomach knot. She didn't need to see the jackets to know what kind of men rode bikes like that. Biker clubs didn't just stop by her diner. And when they did, it was rarely quiet. The engines cut off one by one. Silence stretched thin across the room, held together only by fear and forced politeness. Then the door swung open. A wave of leather, denim, and road dust swept in, carrying the smell of gasoline and dry desert wind. Big men, older men, heavily tattooed men, shoulders wide from years of hauling their own mistakes around. Their faces were lined, weather-worn, scarred from a life lived at full throttle. And in the middle of them stood Mason Holt. Most folks didn't call him by his name. They called him Bear, partly because of his size, partly because of the thick, gray-streaked beard that made him look like he'd stepped straight out of a forest, but mostly because he had the reputation of a man you didn't provoke unless you were tired of your own bones being arranged correctly. He stepped inside, boots thudding softly against the floor. His vest hung open over a worn black t-shirt, and on the back was a patch everyone in the region recognized, even if they pretended they didn't. Linda's breath caught. Rumors followed Mason wherever he went. Someone once said he broke a man's arm in 3 places without breaking a sweat. Someone else swore he'd stood between a burning building and a crying child until firefighters arrived. Depending on who told the story, he was either a monster or a miracle. Linda didn't know which version had walked into her diner. Her hands trembled as she poured a fresh pot of coffee. Hot liquid sloshed close to the rim, and she steadied herself before anyone noticed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud enough she hoped nobody could hear it. The diners closest to the door pretended to eat, but their spoons hovered cautiously above their bowls. A couple by the window grabbed their check and murmured something about getting back to work early. Fear had a way of making people hurry, but not Emily. Linda's daughter was 10 years old, with a ponytail that never stayed neat, and a habit of believing everyone deserved kindness until they proved otherwise. She was sweeping near the back door, humming to herself, completely unaware or completely unbothered by the sudden tension that had frozen the diner. Linda shot her a warning look, hoping she would stay behind the counter. Emily spotted the bikers. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but curiosity, before Linda could stop her. Emily set the broom aside and walked toward the table where Bear had taken a seat. His club settled in around him, the bench creaking under their combined weight. Linda's pulse spiked. "Emily," she whispered urgently. "Stay here." But Emily didn't even glance her way. She walked straight up to the most intimidating man in the room. The 116 grown adults were silently praying she would avoid. Bear looked up from the menu he'd barely picked up, his eyes deep, tired, the color of desert stone, lifted toward the small girl standing in front of him. She tilted her head, studied his face, then asked the question that made every person in the diner forget how to breathe. "Mister, why do you look sad?" Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in midair. One of Bear's bikers actually coughed, in shock. Bear blinked slowly, like someone had just spoken a language he hadn't heard in years. His jaw tightened. Not in anger. More like he was trying to keep something heavy from breaking loose. He cleared his throat. "I don't look sad. Kid," he rumbled. Voice low as rolling thunder. Emily squinted at him. Unimpressed. "You kinda do." Linda's knees nearly gave out. But Bear didn't snap. Didn't growl. Didn't tell her to get lost. He looked away. Just for a second. But long enough for Linda to realize something startling. The question had hurt him. Not because it was rude, but because it was true. Emily noticed the patch on the left side of his vest. A small, rounded shield, stitched in faded red thread. Her finger reached out, tracing the edge of it lightly. "My grandpa had one like that," she said. "He told me it meant you protect people." Bear's entire body went still. One of his men softened visibly, shoulders dropping. Another shifted awkwardly. Like he didn't want anyone to see his expression change. Something in the air shifted. Something invisible, but unmistakable. The kind of shift that happens when a harsh assumption cracks for the first time. Bear looked down at the patch. Then at Emily. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than anyone expected. A man his size could manage. "Your grandpa was right," he said. "It used to mean that," Emily smiled. "Bright and pure. The kind of smile only children and saints know how to give freely. Doesn't it still?" He didn't answer, but his eyes did. They softened, not much, but enough for Linda to see a flicker of a man buried under years of weight. A man who was tired, lonely, carrying something he didn't know how to put down. Linda realized then that her hands had stopped shaking. The room, once stiff with fear, seemed to breathe again. The bikers leaned back, relaxing just slightly. And Bear, this massive, haunted man, everyone whispered about, allowed a hint of a smile to form beneath that gray beard. It wasn't a happy smile, or even a confident one. It was the smile of someone who hasn't been spoken to kindly in a very long time. Sometimes the people we fear the most carry the gentlest truths, and sometimes it takes a child to remind them they're still human. The diner slowly relaxed after the first shock of the bikers' arrival. Though relaxed was a generous word. People still talked in low voices, eyes drifting again and again toward the leather-clad giants at the back table, as if waiting for the first sign of trouble. But trouble didn't come. Instead, something else did. Emily pulled up a chair next to Bear, as if she'd known him her whole life, chin propped in her hands. Waiting expectantly, Bear shifted in his seat, clearly unsure what to do with the attention of a child. Finally, he tapped the small, faded shield patch on his vest. "You asked about this," he said. Emily nodded so fast her ponytail whipped her cheek. "Grandpa said, patches tell stories." A quiet warmth flickered in Bear's eyes. "Your grandpa was a smart man." Then, after a slow breath, he began talking, his voice lower, rougher, as if pulling memories up from a place he didn't visit often. "This was given to me a long time ago, back when I was better than I ended up." Emily leaned in, her whole body absorbed in the story. "There was a house fire," Bear said. "Middle of the night. Wind blowing hard enough to carry sparks across half the county. I was riding home from a job and saw the glow. Pulled up. Found a family screaming outside. Their little boy was still stuck inside." Emily's eyes went wide with worry. Even though she knew he must have saved the kid, he wouldn't have the patch otherwise. Bear's voice softened. "Smoke everywhere. Heat so hot, it felt like it peeled your skin open. But I heard him crying. You don't ignore that. Not if you've got a heart." He rubbed the edge of the patch with his thumb. "I got him out. Barely." Roof collapsed right after. The diner had gone still again. But this time, in a very different way. Customers who moments earlier had been afraid of him, now listened without meaning to. Drawn in by the quiet sincerity, threading through every word, Emily whispered, "You were a hero." Bear gave a small, Sad smile. Maybe for a minute. But life doesn't hand out medals for one good deed. Sweetheart. Not when you mess things up after. There it was again, the sadness Emily had noticed. The weight behind his eyes. He didn't look like a monster now. He looked like a man who carried scars on the inside as deep as those on his hands. Linda watched from behind the counter, torn between unease and something she couldn't name. For years, she'd told herself to be careful around men like Bear Big. Rough. Unpredictable. And yet, nothing about him felt threatening now. Not the way he talked to Emily. Not the apologetic slump of his shoulders. Not even the way he kept glancing at the window, as if expecting someone dangerous to appear. When Linda brought over his burger and coffee, her fingers brushed his. Just a glancing touch, but enough to send a jolt through her. Bear pulled his hand back immediately. Sorry, he murmured. Didn't mean to scare your folks. We're just passing through. Long ride ahead. My folks, Linda echoed. Bear nodded toward the room. Place got tight when we walked in. He gave her an embarrassed, half smile. Didn't mean to put that weight on you. Linda blinked. Politeness was the last thing she expected from a man who could snap a pool cue in half with one hand. It's all right, she said. And for the first time, she meant it. But even as he thanked her and took a bite of his burger, his eyes flicked again toward the parking lot. Quick. Sharp. Scanning. Like a guard dog who sensed danger before anyone else did. Something was off. Linda told herself she was imagining it. That old habit's fear. Caution. The instinct to protect Emily were making her see shadows where there were none. But the uneasy prickle along her spine didn't fade. And 15 minutes later, she realized Bear's instincts had been right. The rumble of a battered engine cut through the quiet afternoon. A dusty pickup swerved into the lot, tires spitting gravel against the diner's windows. Inside, the sound was sharp enough to make several people jump. 2 men stumbled out mid-30s. Unshaven. Sweat slicked. Swaying on their feet. The kind of men Linda recognized instantly. Drunk. Angry. Looking for someone to blame. Linda's pulse spiked. Bear had already turned in his seat. Eyes narrowing. The door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. The taller man spotted Linda immediately. His lip curled back. And he jabbed a finger at her. You Parker. Linda swallowed. Linda Parker. Yes. But, you think you can hide. His words slurred, but the fury behind them was crystal clear. Your no-good ex owes us. We're here to collect. The other man lurched toward her, knocking a table sideways. Utensils crashed to the floor. Customers shrank back, some shielding their children. Linda stepped away from the counter. Heart pounding. My ex-husband hasn't been around in years. I don't know what he owed you. But he didn't leave me anything but debt and trouble. Yeah, the man sneered. Then guess who pays instead? He reached over the counter and grabbed Emily's wrist. Emily cried out in shock. Linda's scream died in her throat, strangled by terror. And then, a hand. A huge, scarred, immovable hand closed around the man's arm, like a steel trap. Bear. He rose from his chair, with a quiet, controlled fury that made the entire room go still. Every part of him shifted into something dangerous, not wild. Not out of control, just utterly focused. His voice dropped to a level that made the air feel colder. Let her go. The drunk man turned, ready to swing. He never got the chance. Bear moved faster than a man his size should have been able to. His grip tightened, twisting the man's wrist in a smooth arc that forced him to release Emily. The man cried out as his knees buckled. The second aggressor lunged at Bear, but Bear barely moved. He stepped aside, redirected the man's momentum, and sent him tumbling across the floor with nothing more than a firm shove and the pivot of a boot. No punches thrown. No rage. No unnecessary force. Just protection. Calm. Precise. Unstoppable protection. Emily scrambled into Linda's arms. Sobbing, Linda held her tight, her own breath shaking. Bear kept one arm pinned between the first man's shoulder blades. The other hand raised slightly, ready to stop anyone else who tried to get close. His bikers stood behind him, forming a silent wall that made the two attackers look suddenly small. Within minutes, flashing lights appeared outside. A sheriff's deputy hurried in, hand on his holster. "What Holt?" he blurted, seeing Bear holding the struggling man. "You again." Bear stepped back, releasing the man gently but firmly into the deputy's custody. "These two threatened the lady and grabbed her kid. You might want to check. Their truck smells like a brewery in there." The deputy sniffed the air and grimaced. "Yeah, I can smell it from here." He cuffed both men, shaking his head. "Good thing Holt was here. Else, this would have ended bad." The room exhaled all at once. Linda looked at Bear, not the man from the rumors, not the intimidating biker, but the stranger who had stepped between her daughter and danger without hesitation. The entire diner saw it too. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He was here to stop it. For the first time since the bikes had pulled in, the room wasn't afraid of him. It was grateful. The diner stayed quiet, long after the deputies drove off, with the two men in cuffs. People slowly returned to their meals. But the atmosphere had changed, like someone had opened a window and let fresh air in after a storm. Fear had been replaced with something else entirely. Respect. Gratitude. Awe. Linda wiped down the counter with shaky hands, still trying to steady her breathing. Emily sat at one of the stools, staring up at Bear, as though he'd walked straight out of a storybook. He stood near the entrance now, rolling his shoulders, as if trying to shake off the tension of the fight. Linda hesitated, then approached him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Bear shrugged like it was nothing. But the motion was stiff, almost painful. Anyone would have done the same. Linda shook her head. "No, not anyone." He didn't argue. But he didn't accept the praise either. He just stared at the floorboards, jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't know how to say. That was when Linda noticed it. The sadness behind his eyes wasn't just a flicker. It was rooted there, deep and old, like a bruise time never bothered to heal. "Are you okay?" she asked. Bear huffed a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. "You don't need to worry about me." "Miss Parker." "Linda," she corrected gently. He nodded, but he still didn't meet her eyes. It wasn't until Emily slipped off her stool and tugged lightly on his vest that Bear finally looked up. "Thank you for saving me," she said, voice soft but steady. Bear froze, completely. Something unguarded cracked in his expression. Linda saw it, the pain, the grief, the longing he'd been carrying like a ghost at his heels. He cleared his throat. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" Emily asked, curiosity bright as always. Bear looked away toward the window. The desert sun caught the side of his face, revealing a scar along his temple Linda hadn't noticed before. "My daughter," he said. Linda's breath caught. Bear's voice dropped low, a deep rumble softened by memory. "She'd be 'bout your age now." Emily blinked. "Where is she?" Bear swallowed hard. "Don't know." The room faded around him. His words came slow, like each one carried weight. "I lost her. Long time ago. Wasn't drinking. Wasn't drugs. Was me, defending someone who needed help." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his vest, as if grounding himself. "Got into a fight. A bad one. Ended up in prison for it." Linda covered her mouth, heart aching. "By the time I got out," Bear continued, "my ex had taken her. New address. New number. No forwarding anything. Just gone." He exhaled, shakily. "Haven't seen her in 12 years. The diner went quiet again, but not with fear this time. With empathy. With a collective ache. Bear's voice cracked faintly, the way a man's does when he isn't used to crying, but can't help it. "Every year, on her birthday, I ride. All day. Every highway I can find. Try to be the man she'd deserve. The man she might forgive someday. Linda felt her chest tighten so hard it hurt. She wasn't expecting this. This gentle truth from a man who looked like he could take on the whole world with his bare hands. Emily stepped closer. She'd be proud you saved me. The words hit Bear like a blow. He inhaled sharply, shoulders hitching. And for a second, just a second, Linda saw tears shine in his eyes. Then Emily did the unthinkable. She wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight, earnest hug. Gasps rippled through the diner. Bear stood frozen. Like no one had touched him in years. Like he didn't remember what to do with affection. Slowly, painfully, he lowered one giant hand and rested it awkwardly on Emily's back. Then pulled her in closer. Just a little. Not too much. Not enough to frighten her, but enough to show that Emily had pierced a part of him he thought was long dead. Linda turned away, swallowing hard. There wasn't a person in the room who didn't feel that moment in their bones. Not long after, the bikers began gathering their things. The storm of their arrival had turned into a quiet exit. Like they were trying not to disturb the peace they'd helped restore. Before Bear left, he walked to the counter where Emily waited, patching together the courage of a child who'd just looked lost in the eyes and given it love anyway. Bear reached up to his vest and unpinned the patch, the shield Emily had touched earlier. The same one he'd earned running into fire. He placed it in her small hand. Emily stared at it, stunned. But, isn't this important? Bear's voice gentled in a way Linda had never imagined possible. A protector only matters if he protects someone. Sweetheart. Today, you reminded me who I used to be. Linda's eyes stung. Emily clutched the patch to her chest like a treasure. Bear met Linda's gaze. No bravado. No mask. Just a quiet respect. Most men never learn to give. You've got a brave kid, he said. And a good heart. Thank you, Linda whispered. For seeing her. And for what you did today. He nodded once. Firm. Honest. Then he turned toward the door. His bikers followed silently. Not with swagger, but with the solemnity of men who had watched something sacred happen and didn't want to break the spell. The door shut behind them. The diner was left in stunned, reverent silence, broken only by the soft chime of the bell, still trembling on its hinge. Inside, Emily held the patch tight. Linda wiped her eyes. And everyone who'd witnessed the moment knew. Sometimes, the man who looks the roughest is the one who's been fighting the hardest battle just to be someone worth forgiving. Night settled softly over the desert, wrapping the little diner in a quiet so deep Linda could hear her own breath as she wiped the last table. The neon sign outside flickered, casting a faint red glow across the empty booths, where hours earlier, fear, conflict, and courage had collided in ways she'd never forget. Emily had fallen asleep in the office, clutching Bear's patch in both hands, as if it were something sacred. And maybe it was. Linda returned to the counter to turn off the lights, and that's when she saw it. A folded piece of paper, tucked neatly beneath Bear's empty coffee cup. She hadn't noticed it before. Her heart fluttered uncertainly as she picked it up, smoothing the creased edges with trembling fingers. The handwriting inside was rough, uneven, as if written by a man who didn't put his feelings on paper very often. She read it once, then again, slower. Thank you for treating a man like a human. You helped me believe I can still be a father. Linda pressed her hand to her chest. It wasn't a long message. It wasn't fancy or poetic, but it carried more weight than 100 apologies from the man who'd abandoned her years ago. It was the truth of a wounded soul, trying to climb back toward hope. She stood there in the middle of the diner, the note in one hand, the dim lights reflecting softly on the counter. Across the room, Emily stirred, the patch glowing faintly in her small palm, as if it held the warmth of the man who'd trusted her with it. The narrator's voice settles gently over the stillness. Sometimes the hero isn't the man in shining armor. Sometimes, it's the man the world crossed out, until a child reminded him he was worth saving. A soft pause. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Riders of Honor for more stories that celebrate courage, redemption, and the people who protect us in ways we never see.